Hi guys, and welcome to my list of top 5 most nostalgic games. This is retro games that when you play them or when you think about them, you get a sense of nostalgia, yearning for the past. I'm sure you've all got games like that. For me, I grew up with computers. My first computer was an Amstrad 464. And I had the Atari ST, then I had the Sega Mega Drive, and then PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, etc. And I would consider anything from PlayStation 1 and before to be where most of my memories, my most nostalgic memories come from. So you're going to see a list that is pre-2002 when the PlayStation 2 released. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the list. I just want to give a shout out to the Isolated Gamerz for tagging me to make this video. I would never have thought of doing a video like this otherwise, but I'm pleased I did because it's got me familiar with some new software. And please check out the Isolated Gamerz channel. He does a lot of retro reviews and some other retro related stuff as well. I can personally recommend the Double Dragon review he did recently, and I will put a link to his channel in the description. So without further ado, here is my top 5. I would just like to say in advance, apologies if the editing or the audio is poor in this video. It's my first time using some of these bits of software, and I didn't want to spend too long getting this video together because I'm late on it already, so you may have to fiddle around with the volume from time to time, so apologies in advance if that's the case. So as you can see from the title card, number 5 on my list is Double Dragon. That's the arcade version from 1987, and it's made by Technos Japan. Side-scrolling beat-em-ups have probably always been my favourite retro genre. There's just something I've always really enjoyed about sort of taking on waves of thugs, fighting my way through whatever environments. Yeah, no, I've always really enjoyed them, and Double Dragon I just think has got a lot going for it that other beat-em-ups haven't, basically, and that includes ones that came later which didn't really take some of the ideas that Double Dragon had already included. I'll give you some examples in a second, but first of all I'll just explain why I love Double Dragon so much. First of all, you've got great music, especially I think the first 2 levels. Really memorable stuff, really good sound effects, really satisfying when you hit opponents and that type of thing. You've got great level design, especially, I mean, Double Dragon 2 pretty much followed the blueprint from the first game, but the first game, the level design is just very memorable. The fact that you're not just walking along a flat, environment, you've got elevators, that type of thing that you need to traverse, in order to get to the final stage. And you've got a great selection of baddies as well, different characters. I mean, before Double Dragon, I think the early fighting games tended to have very similar characters, or the same character repeated throughout the game, whereas Double Dragon you really had a good variety. And a memorable boss at the end of most stages as well. A Bobo, Willy the boss at the end. I forget some of the other names now, but yeah, some really cool characters. And you also had obviously weapons, great selection of weapons. I think this was the first beat 'em up I remember where you could actually pick up crates, rocks, boxes, etc. and it was a nice touch that you didn't actually lose your weapons in this game, unlike a lot of games like Final Fight and Streets of Rage where you do lose your weapon. I find that quite frustrating, really. So yeah, all these things I think help make Double Dragon, you know, one of the best in the genre, and it's still really playable today, except for the if you're playing an arcade port, then if you unless you've got a version that fixes the bug, well, not a bug, then you do get the slowdown, you know, from the arcade. Something that is more noticeable now than I think it was back in the day. So yeah, that's number 1 on my list, or number 5 in my list I should say, of my retro games, and that is Double Dragon. So number 4 on my list of nostalgic retro games is Toejam Earl. This was released in 1991 by Johnson Vorsanger Productions and was published by Sega. Now, I used to play this game with my sister. We used to play it on 2-player, and it's one of those games that is so much more fun, 2-player cooperative. You get a split screen. I think you could split it vertically or horizontally, but I can't quite remember now, but I think we used to play it horizontally anyway, you know, so one of your screens would be on top of the other. And it was just one of the most original games I've ever played, and it had that frustration factor. It was funny. Some of the humour in it is just brilliant. It's got a really funky soundtrack. It's because the 2 protagonists are basically they're rappers trying to get back to their home planet. They've crash landed on Earth, and that's your goal. Actually, you have to try and find the pieces of your spaceship. They're scattered over sort of 20 levels. So yeah, that's your aim. On each level you've got to, I think there's a piece of the spaceship on every 2 or 3 levels. There's not a piece on every level, but on every level there is a telephone box or a time warp, whatever you want to call it, and once you found it you go up a level to the next level. I suppose you'd call it an elevator actually, as you'll see from some of the footage on the screen. Once you find it, you're going up a level basically until you get to the 20th level. Yeah, it can be a really tricky game. There's a certain amount of unfairness to it sometimes. If you know, sometimes you get attacked, you get knocked off the edge and fall down the level to the map below, and sometimes when that happens you get knocked down another level, so you have to work your way back up through the levels. And as it's an old school game, there's no save points, checkpoints, so yeah, you just have to work your way back up, and you uncover bits of the map as you go along on each level, so you've got no idea where anything is. That includes the elevator. You need to go up a level, and obviously you can't get in the elevator till you've found the spaceship part. And as I say, I used to play this with my sister on the Mega Drive. We spend hours just trying to complete it. It took us, I think, probably a good few goes before we managed it. And it's definitely worth checking out. I'm going to put a link in the description to a video by James Rolfe and who's the other chap? Mike Mette. They do Cinemassacre. Basically, they did a James and Mike Monday about this game, and it was pretty funny to watch, just to remember all the stresses and stuff that I used to go through with my sister playing this. And it's got some great pickups, what do you call them, power-ups, but it's also got a lot of power-ups that are bad for you, so You can basically, they're in the form of presents, and when you pick them up, you don't, until you've identified what each one is, which you do as you progress. Before you've identified, you can just be picking one up, and it'll be bad for you. You'll get a swarm of bees or something just come and attack you. So you have to be a bit careful. But yeah, as I say, really original. A really good soundtrack. Difficulty level is good. It's not too easy. It's a bit frustrating, but a lot of old games were. But it wasn't, you could complete it. But I think it was, considering Mega Drive games used to be 40 quid even back then, I think it was good value for money, and it's really worth playing on 2-player as opposed to 1-player if you ever get the chance. If you like what you see in the video, I highly recommend it, and that's why it's on the list. So the next game on my list of favourite retro games is King's Quest III: To Hair is Human. I don't know if I've pronounced hair right, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. Basically, this was from one of my favourite publishers back in the day, and that was Sierra. They used to produce a lot of adventure games, including the Space Quest Saga, the Leisure Suit Larry series, and the Police Quest games as well. And it was a toss-up between including this or Police Quest 2, which is my other favourite from all the games they produced. And they did produce a lot. I chose this one because I remember going for a friend with this back in the day, probably the year of release. My friend used to get these games pretty early in their lifespan, and this one just really struck a chord with us for some reason. The story was great. You were imprisoned by an evil wizard. You had to you were a slave, and when he gets called away, a bit like Gandalf in the first Lord of the Rings, although he wasn't evil, you have to plot your escape. So it's all about trying to escape the house, and then you picking up things to make potions with the intent of turning your wizard master into a cat later in the game. That's not the end of the game either. You then go off on adventures. I think you come up against Medusa in the desert. You have to go on a pirate ship. All sorts of, I suppose that sort of staple from that sort of series is included. And no, it's great fun. And tricky as well. It was these text-based adventure games. The mixture of on-screen control and having to type a text input. It was always more difficult than the point and clicks that followed. Things like Monkey Island and the Zack McCracken games. They were somewhat easier because there was only a finite amount of things you could do with the text-based with the point and click inputs. Whereas text-based inputs, you had to be precise really, or you'd get it wrong, and it would just tell you you're wrong. Some of these games were also pretty punishing as well. You could just do something wrong and it was game over. There was no hand holding. I think in the point and click games that followed, you didn't tend to die so much either. So yeah, no, I have good memories of this one particularly, just spending hours and hours trying to figure it out. And one thing I always remember fondly about these games is that if you got stuck, you were really stuck. Back then there was no internet, there was no YouTube to check for a walkthrough, there was no Googling a question, how do I get past this area, what do I need? The only way to really get past an obstacle that was stopping you progressing in the game, you had to phone a company called Guiding Light, and they were a video game helpline, and you'd phone them up. It was a premium rate number, and you'd explain your problem, and they would go through their walkthrough guides or whatever, however they kept the info, and they'd give you the answer. And I think me and my friend, we must have phoned them for most of these adventure games at some point. You know, there was always something that we couldn't figure out. It was either we would type in the wrong input, or we just missed an object somewhere. So yeah, times have changed. You just can't imagine having to phone a helpline now just to get past a section of a game, that's for sure. So yeah, King's Quest III, To Hair is Human. Great adventure game from Sierra, and I don't think I said the year of release actually, and that was, I think it was 1986. Yeah, and I originally played this on the Atari ST. It was obviously released for PC, IBM, and Amiga. So the next game on my list of favourite retro games is WWF Wrestling Fest. This is an arcade game from 1991, and to be honest, I think it's still the best wrestling game ever made. I'm not a fan of the modern ones that they release, and I don't even follow wrestling. I followed it for about a year growing up, probably around the time that this came out, and you've got some of the best, most iconic wrestlers. You know, in this game you've got Hulk Hogan, Undertaker, Jake the Snake Roberts, Big Boss Man, yeah, all guys like that. And in this game you had two main game modes. You had Tag Team and you had Royal Rumble, and Royal Rumble got really chaotic because you could have up to 6 players in the ring at once, so that made for some great matches. And the game wasn't too unfair either. You know, you had a good chance of winning on 1 or 2 credits, providing you were playing well. And the game was 4-player as well, so if you were playing it in the arcade rather than, you know, on a home emulator, then yeah, you could have some great fun on 4-player if all the pads, all the joysticks and buttons are working properly. You also had steel cage matches, I think halfway through. If you were on the tag team version, obviously, you could take the fights outside the ring. Yeah, just a really great game. And it's still really playable today. There's no slowdown really. Yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough, and I've got good memories of playing with friends. I used to spend ages on this, and I've got it on emulation now, and still fire out now and again. But yeah, people talk about these Fire Pro wrestling games being the best in the genre, but I tried one and I just couldn't understand the appeal really. It's got an isometric viewpoint, and yeah, just playing this is a lot more immediate. So for me, best wrestling game ever made, and you're probably seeing a pattern here. A lot of fighting games on my top 5. Okay, so number 1 on my list of favourite nostalgic video games is Target Renegade. This was a beat 'em up released to home computers in 1988, and it was a sequel to the arcade game Renegade, which was also converted to home computers a year or 2 before. And I think this was one of the first home computer beat 'em ups to feature cooperative play, which is one of the first things I really enjoyed about it. It had great music, really sort of haunting music, I think it's fair to say. It's got some scrolling in, which is quite surprising for an early game. Not side scrolling, but on the first level when you go down in the multi-story car park, the elevator as it goes down, you've actually got some scrolling there, and it's quite smooth, so it's quite impressive for an 8-bit game. And you've also got an interesting thing: when you complete the game, you get to start again, but it's harder the second time round. You've got enemies that now duck your flying kicks. You've got I think they take one more hit to die, and obviously this makes the time limit even more difficult to try and sort of clear the round before the time limit runs out. So it's a nice little touch, and they did this with Renegade as well. And it's a shame that other sort of beat 'em ups didn't actually employ this mode as well, because I think it's quite a good challenge. But yeah, it's a great early beat 'em up. It was released for Amstrad, Spectrum, and Commodore. The Commodore one's notable for being only one player, and slightly different music arrangements. Well, not arrangements, but it sounds different just because of the different type of music chips or whatever that computer has. But the Spectrum version is monochrome as well, with I think it was a yellow, black and white palette mainly. Spectrum used to suffer with that sort of thing a lot. So for me, the Amstrad version was the definitive version. So I was really pleased that was the home computer I had at the time. I was very young when I played that, and I'd actually seen it playing in WH Smith's, I think, basically where they used to have all the computer games. They used to have a couple of monitors, and they used to play a demo reel, and they used to show 2 or 3 minutes of certain games, and Target Renegade came on, and that's how I sort of got interested in it and ended up buying it. And one more thing to say about this game is on 2-player, it's one of the few beat 'em ups where if you've got 2 players, if you're playing 2-player cooperative, you actually get more enemies on the screen. You go from, I think it's 3 in single player to 4 or 5 in 2-player, and I think that's a great little touch. As there's 2 of you, it should, there should be an extra enemy or 2. I've played other co-op games where you've got a friend and they're so busy beating everyone up or shooting everyone that you're stood there doing nothing, and the more enemies you have on screen, the less likely that is to happen. So it's a really nice touch, and I'm surprised they could do it back then, because games like this used to suffer from having too many sprites or enemies on screen sometimes. So yeah, great little feature, and I'm surprised they didn't include it in things like Double Dragon or Final Fight. I'm pretty sure they didn't. And yeah, that's it. It's a great game. Haunting music. Not a lot else I can say about that one. Worth checking out if you like going through old beat 'em ups, for sure. So that's my list of 5 most nostalgic video games. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to put in the comments just a few more honourable mentions, because I don't think I'm going to have time to add any video footage for those ones, so that's probably the best way to do it. Thank you to the Isolated Gamers for tagging me to make this video. It's quite an experiment for me. I've never done this type of video before with clips from other games and vocals recorded, voice recorded separately, so thanks for your help on making this. I would shout out some other people, tag some other people, but I'm not sure they would want to make videos like this, so all I will say is to Mock Power and Mina71, please feel free in the comments to, if you've got a top 5 retro video games, leave them in the comments just so I can see what they are. It'd be interesting to see. And I'm probably at some point going to do a top 20 modern video games list, so obviously that's going to be a lot more work, but hopefully that'll be of interest to some people. And if you made it this far, thanks very much for watching.